is brutal. You had popes fighting each other, like killing each other. So there was a pope named Stephen VI. He had the body of the pope before him exhumed, dressed in his episcopal robes so he could stand trial.
Shalom and welcome to another Shalano TV podcast with Ron Cantor, all things Israel. It's great to be here. Thank you for joining us today. How you doing, Ron?
I'm good. Do you have a name?
I'm Evan. My name's Evan, but it's Ron's podcast.
I thought it would be good
It would be
to introduce you.
Good
as
to
well.
know. So how was your trip here today?
So I'm in Tel Aviv, and as you know, I come from another city in the south. You know, Israelis, I like the train because the bus is very crowded. But even on the train, Israelis, like really everyone in the Middle East, are very loud. There is no such thing as like your own personal space. Right. It's like my space, I will take your space and everyone's space. And I don't know, I just had this like thought on the way to the train that the Lord, I just felt like God was telling me, because I get frustrated. I get very mad at people who are talking on their phones. And they don't just talk on their phones, Evan. They put their phones on speaker on the train and they have a loud conversation. And that, I don't do well with that. And I just felt like the Lord was like, this is an opportunity for you to grow in character. So, and you say, well, how do you know it was the Lord? Because when I got on the train, this older gentleman sat right across from me. Not, you know, you face
Right.
each other, but he was actually across on the other side of the train. And he began to talk to, I assume that was his daughter or granddaughter, in a very loud voice. And then when his phone rang, it was like his phone could not have been louder. The ringer, it was almost like he had, you know what, I'm going to bring an amplifier. I'm going to bring a megaphone with me so that when it rings, I'm going to make sure everyone on this train hears it. And so, you know what happened today? I grew in character. I'm a different man because I chose not to get annoyed or to say anything like, hey, bro, there's other people on the train. And it was the whole ride.
Wow.
Loud, and then the guy behind me was having a, again, speaker conversation with somebody, something very...
I've had many people on the phone where they watch YouTube videos, but also they turn on the speaker next to you and they just watch their video as if that's normal.
Yeah. And you know what the thing is you and I are from America. We've been here for over 20 years. You've been here for how long?
25.
25 years. So, it's their country. It's their culture.
It is.
It's still annoying.
But I'm still trying to teach them.
Yes.
That there's some things you can learn from.
I have two great missions in life. One is to share the gospel with Jewish people. The other thing is to change culture here in the Middle East when it comes to personal space.
Less touching and a little bit quieter. Yeah. Wow. Well, it's good you made it.
Yeah.
So it's good to be here. I think we had our first episode. We talked about Shalano TV and the miracle of how that all happened. The last episode we talked about your book Identity Theft, how it came to be and how it's been used, how it was translated to Hebrew, and how it's been used as a tool to really help Jews and Gentiles understand.
Initially, I wasn't thinking about Jewish people. I was just thinking about Gentiles. Understanding the Jewish roots of the New Testament. It's a Jewish book. What happened is that Jewish people started getting saved, reading the book.
So that was very interesting, and I understand today we're going to delve in a bit to the book Identity Theft and talk about some of the content and some of the information that is in there. And I understand we're going to talk about names, something about names.
What's in a name?
What's in a name? What arose by any other name?
The book's called Identity Theft for a reason, because I'm saying that Jesus was the first victim of identity theft. No, his credit card was not stolen. Nobody got his password to his computer. They took this Jewish man, an Israeli, a Jew, fulfillment of the Hebrew prophets, and they turned him Swedish or Norwegian or German or American.
Right.
His hair somehow became blonde. His eyes became blue. I have seen blue-eyed Moroccans, but it's very rare, very rare. And his skin somehow became white, when I'm sure his skin looked far less like mine and closer to my wife's, who is born in the Middle East.
Right. Moroccan.
So he was the first victim of identity theft. And so I want to start with going through the names. And by the way, you can get a free copy of Identity Theft. It normally costs $500, but if anybody will pay that, but no, it normally, I don't know, $15.
Yeah, $12, $15.
You can get a free copy just by going to SholanoTV.com, and you can download it. We're not going to actually send it to you, but we're going to give you all the content, and most people don't really read physical books anymore anyways. If you do, God bless you. My wife, she still does. She will not convert to iPads. For me, and you know I'm in school. I've been in school for the past 3 years.
Right.
The fact that I have an entire library on this tiny little iPad thing is unbelievable for me. So I love it. So we'll send you a free ebook of identity theft. Just go to SholanoTV.com. It all will happen automatically, supernaturally, and you'll be able to read the book. And but yeah, today we want to talk about names, different names of people in the New Testament.
All right, so the first name I understand we're going to talk about is a name that I imagine most people have heard, written several times in the Bible, and it's in English, Jesus, or Yeshua, as we say it in Hebrew.
Right. So I grew up, I think I said this last week, I really thought that Jesus was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Christ.
Mr. and Mrs. Christ.
The first time I sort of understood who he was when I saw a picture, I think it was in the 4th grade or 2nd grade, of a man on a cross, which is kind of a crazy thing for a 2nd grader to see.
Yeah.
You know, when he doesn't know the context. You know, he's nailed to a cross.
Scary.
So I went home, asked my mom about it. She said, oh yeah, we as Jewish people, we believe he's a prophet maybe. Christians believe he's the Messiah. Of course, I don't know what the Messiah is. Yeah. And that was that. Jesus was never called Jesus in his lifetime. And I want to be clear, Evan, this is not because I'm hung up on it. There are people that will make whole ministries about telling you you're not saying the right name. And that's just a religious spirit. That is not our goal here. Our goal here is to learn the Jewishness of the New Covenant. Not to say, you know, God doesn't understand you because you pronounce his name wrong. Right. And by the way, nobody knows how to pronounce the name of God. You know, Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahweh. There's no W in Hebrew. There's no J in Hebrew. So I think God knows our heart. But the fact of the matter is this: God, you know, what do you call them? Isus, which is Greek, or Isa, which is Arabic, or Yeshua. He hears, he listens. He is not hung up on how you reach out to him. However, let's find out how he got his name. Go ahead and read Matthew chapter 1.
Matthew chapter 1, verses 20 and 21. But after he had considered this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said...
Whoa, who's he?
Joseph.
Yes.
Almost got me there. Is it Yeshua? Or Joseph, yes, correct. Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary home as your wife, because what is conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus, because he will save his people from their sins.
All right, so there is something obvious in there that a lot of people kind of miss over because they're so used to this story.
Right.
And by the way, he says I should not have asked who he was, because right after that he says Joseph.
He said Joseph.
Right.
It was an easy question, though.
Right. I was just thinking people might not know, but yeah, anyways. Can you imagine being Joseph? I mean, do you ever think about that, folks? You know, you're betrothed, which is as good as married, to a young lady.
And an angel shows up.
Well, forget the angel. Let's go back a week when she comes to him and says, something I got to tell you. You see, I'm pregnant, but it's not what you think. There was an angel, there was a dream, there was this, and obviously, the Bible says he was going to divorce her quietly, good guy, but I mean, that's like, yeah, right, sure, Mary. And then the angel comes to him. Now, here's the thing. He says you are to give him the name Yeshua, or Jesus, which you read in your Bibles, but in Hebrew, obviously he wasn't speaking English, and he wasn't speaking Greek, which would be Isus. He would have been speaking Aramaic, or he would have been speaking Hebrew, and since he was talking about the name of the Messiah, I'm sure he was speaking Hebrew.
Yeah.
And he says, you're going to give him the name Yeshua. Okay, so big deal, Ron. Well, it is a big deal because it's a wordplay. He says, because he will Moshiach, he will save his people from their sins.
Right.
Yeshua, Moshiach, which means savior, or it's the verb to save, or salvation, which is Yeshua.
Yeshua.
So his name, Yeshua, means salvation. You read the Bible. You know, whenever somebody has a baby, or often, give him this name because of this.
There's a meaning behind it.
Exactly.
Right.
And when Mary, as we'll call her for now, gives birth to the Messiah, the angel says you have to give him this name because it's connected to his calling. And then as you see, Simeon finds him, after he's birthed, they bring him to the temple. And what does Simeon say?
Simeon says, this is Luke 2:29 through 32. Sovereign Lord, as you have promised, you may now dismiss your servant in peace. For my eyes have seen your salvation, which you have prepared in the sight of all nations, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel.
So there's a lot in that. Number one, Simeon, he doesn't know who this baby is except by the Spirit of God. And he says, my eyes have seen your salvation. How do you say salvation?
Yeshua.
Right. Does he even know that's the kid's name? But he says, my eye, and if he does know, he's probably the prophetic, ringers in him are going crazy because he knows this kid is salvation. And then he says this, he will be a light of revelation for the nations, the glory of your people Israel. So, did Jesus come for the Jews? Did he come for the Gentiles? Yes. He came for the Jewish people and he came for the nations as well. And of course, Isaiah chapter 42 and 49 talks about, which is what he's quoting here, a light for revelation for the Gentiles. Now,
wow.
There's another fellow in the name of, in the Bible with an interesting name. So if I am sharing with people and I tell them I am talking about Yeshua, who do they sometimes think I'm talking about?
Yehoshua.
Right. They think I'm talking about Joshua.
Yeah,
so
Joshua.
They'll say Yehoshua ben Nun, the son of Nun.
Yeah.
And then I have to explain. Now, why would they make that mistake? Because Yeshua is a shortened form of Yehoshua. Joshua is Yehoshua. Now, here's what's interesting. Now, you go look in your English Bibles at home, assuming you're watching from some English-speaking country. Right. The word Joshua is in the New Testament, I think it's 2 times. And in English, it's Joshua.
Joshua.
In Greek, it's Isus. Jesus in Greek is Isus. So let me make it clear. Yehoshua is Yehoshua in Hebrew. Yeshua, Yehoshua, it's the same name. Yeshua, it means salvation. Yehoshua means the Lord. Yahweh is salvation. It's the same name, all right? Why do we know it's the same name? Because when they translated it to Greek, they used the exact same name.
Right.
But for some reason, when they took it to English, they said, let's change this Yehoshua to Joshua, the guy from the Bible that hung out with Moses, but let's take this Yehoshua or Yeshua, and we're just going to transliterate his Greek name from Jesus to Jesus. In other words, they took Joshua directly from Hebrew, but they took Jesus' name through Greece. And
right.
So
why did that happen?
Well, it happened probably, I don't think it's sinister, but it probably happened because they translated the Old Testament from Hebrew and they translated the New Testament from Greek.
From Greek.
The only question we would ask is why then, when Joshua is mentioned in the New Testament, why didn't you call him Jesus? Well, probably they want to confuse people because it's that same guy from the Old Covenant.
Right.
The point I'm trying to make is that it goes to the identity theft. Mm-hmm. Is when I talk about somebody named Jesus, it's not a Jewish sounding name. No Jewish parents are naming their kids Jesus. No. But they are naming their kid Joshua. Right. And it is the exact same name. Now, there's one more thing I want to say. Jewish people today, they refer to, in Israel, they refer to him as Yeshu, which in Hebrew is Imach Shmo V'zichro, which means may his name be blotted out forever. So if I talk to someone about Yeshua, they will either think I'm talking about Joshua, son of Nun.
Yeah.
Moses is his protege. Or they might think, they'll say, Yeshua?
Yes.
And then it gives me an opportunity to say, no. That's an acronym that, sadly, the rabbis created in the Middle Ages.
You won't find it anywhere.
No, and it's a curse,
Yes.
sadly. But more and more people do know exactly who I'm talking about.
I've noticed that in 25 years when I came to Israel, everyone said Yeshu. And there are many people today that even when someone will say Yeshu, an Israeli will come and go, no. His name is Yeshua.
Yeah.
So there's definitely been an understanding.
Yeah, and there was a
There's been a
woman
change.
the other day who wrote an article in the Times of Israel blog, and her whole point was, it's funny because she's Orthodox. It's like,
Right.
Jesus is Jewish.
Right.
Like suddenly Jewish people, they're not saying, I want to become a believer in this man, but they're saying, don't take this guy and make him a Gentile.
Right.
He came from us. And we call our TV station Shalanu, Bigla shehu echad me'itanu, because he's one of us.
Right.
So anyways, there's a little information on the name of Yeshua.
Very interesting. All right, so in Yeshua, I also understand there's some discussion about his mother,
Yes.
Mary,
Yes.
as we would call her in English.
Yes.
That perhaps Mary's not what they called her.
Nobody ever called her
Nobody
Mary.
ever called her Mary?
And many Catholics, particularly in Italy, would call her Maria.
Maria.
Nobody in her lifetime ever called her Maria. Nobody ever called her Mary. I don't even know if they had, I would imagine they had the equivalent of Maria in the Roman Latin world at the time.
Right.
But it came from Hebrew. She was named after somebody else in the Bible. Do you have any idea who?
Miriam, which I believe was Moses' sister,
Right.
who played the tambourine.
Everybody knows that on the other side of the Red Sea is she grabs a tambourine and horse and rider thrown into the sea. And that is where Miriam, the mother of Yeshua, gets her name from. Nobody, again, now, if you want to refer to, I was going to say, we don't pray to Mary, that is a different religion. But if you want to refer to Miriam as Mary, as Maria, that will not bother me a bit. It won't bother you, Evan, will it?
Not at all.
The issue is knowing the roots, that she had a very Jewish name, named after not somebody in the Roman world or the Latin world, but the sister of Moses, Miriam. By the way, it is interesting that just like Joshua and Jesus, if you open up your Bible in English, even though these two women had the exact same name, for some reason in the NIV, ESV, any English Amplified Bible, she is going to be Mary in the New Covenant, but the woman who she's named after with the exact same name in Hebrew is Miriam in English.
Wow.
Now, is this a great conspiracy? No, it's the same thing with Joshua and Jesus, is that they translated the Old Covenant from Hebrew, and so they just kept it Miriam. And in the New Covenant, they had already Hellenized or given Miriam, the mother of Yeshua, a Greek name, which I assume is Maria, and then it goes into English as Mary. But here's the thing, is that Miriam, the mother of Yeshua, Miriam, the sister, it's the same name. And you say, Ron, why are you worked up about this? Here's why I'm worked up about this, is because I grew up not understanding that the New Covenant is a Jewish book full of Jewish people, a message that is acceptable to the Jewish people. We were taught this is a book for non-Jews. And identity theft.
Okay, so that's Mary and Miriam. So what about, let's say, John the Baptist?
Right. Who is this guy, John the Baptist?
He's a Baptist.
He was the first.
The first Baptist.
You know, it's funny because when I had never heard of him in 18 years of living life on earth. That name just never came across my
radar.
Radar, thank you. And I become a believer and I begin to read the Bible, and there's this guy, John the Baptist. And of course, as a brand new Jewish believer who knows nothing, I knew nothing about the New Testament, I'm thinking, oh, that's where he's the first Baptist. Of course, he was not the first Baptist, and I don't even know if we should be calling him John the Baptist, not because he was the baptizer, he was the immerser.
Right.
He did immerse people in water, but when a Jewish person hears that term, John the Baptist, unless they know the history, they're going to think, oh, that guy must have been the first Baptist. And the fact is, he wasn't primarily a baptizer. He was a prophet.
Right.
So, we'd say in Hebrew, Yochanan Hanavi, John the prophet. And he wasn't just a prophet. He was the greatest prophet. He prophesied the coming of Yeshua, but we don't think of him as a prophet. Here's a little quiz we'll do. When I say the name Jeremiah, do you think Jewish or Christian?
Jeremiah, I think Jewish.
Yeah, this is a very easy quiz.
Nobody's
trying to trick you.
Okay, I'm just
Question, the answers are obvious. Isaiah, Jewish or Christian?
Jewish.
Ezekiel?
Jewish.
John the Baptist?
Christian guy with a Bible.
Exactly, except that he was just like them.
Right.
And Jesus said he was the greatest of all of them. So, and even the very act of what he was doing, baptizing people, today for a Jewish person, believing in Yeshua is one thing. To actually go into the waters of immersion, get baptized, is like an act of treachery, of traitorism. Yeah. And it's funny because in the New Covenant, it wasn't. No. Here is a Jewish guy, a prophet, who is on the shores of the Jordan River, and he's baptizing people in water. And nobody's saying to him, what is this strange thing that we're unfamiliar with?
Stealing souls of the...
Right. Is this a new religion?
Right.
And of course not, because baptism, water immersion, was part of Judaism. And even other ancient religions, the idea of water being some sort of sacred or liturgical cleansing, it was very common. But if you go to the temple, the Temple Mount today, we've uncovered 50 to 100 what we'll call immersion tanks that were all in that area. Because if a Jewish person came down from, say, the Galilee, and he purchased a lamb, and he's going to go make a sacrifice at the temple, he couldn't just walk in there. He would have to go into those waters. So baptism is Jewish. And go ahead and read Acts chapter 10. The verse there. This is Peter talking.
What about, we'll do it, I'll do it. What about the mikvah? Isn't there something about the mikvah?
Well, mikvah, that would be the immersion tank.
Okay.
So mikvah is the Jewish way of saying immersion tank.
Okay.
So yes, there are mikvah, and a woman at the end of her monthly cycle, she would have to go into the mikveh to be cleansed, and then she would.
So certainly the use of water was, as a cleansing, was common. It wasn't this strange thing that was a picture of Christianity.
Right, and even today, it is in Orthodox Judaism, particularly for women.
Right.
But if a Jewish person professes faith in Yeshua, and they go into these waters, it's a shock.
It's seen as right. Okay.
Now read the verse in Acts chapter 10, because here's something really funny. Because here's Peter, and we're going to talk about Peter next. He gets this revelation that Gentiles can become believers. Isn't that funny? For the first 10 years, people say that the New Testament, that's for the Gentiles.
Right.
The Bible's for the Jews. The Old Covenant's for the Jews.
Right.
And yet, in the actual New Testament, up until Acts 10, they're only preaching to Jewish people.
Only Jewish people.
They thought it was just for Jewish people.
Right.
In fact, even though Jesus says right at the beginning of Acts, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth, ad kitzot haaretz, go to the ends of the earth. They didn't. No. They primarily stay in Jerusalem. They go down to Tel Aviv, which was Jaffa at the time, but they're not reaching the Gentiles. So finally, Peter gets this prophetic picture about the Gentiles being cleansed, and he goes into the home of this guy Cornelius. He begins to preach. The Spirit of God falls on the people. They begin to speak in tongues, and then Peter says what?
Then Peter said, "Surely no one can stand in the way of their being baptized with water. They have received the Holy Spirit just as we have." So he ordered that they be baptized in the name of Yeshua, Jesus the Messiah. Then they asked Peter to stay with them for a few days.
Right. So the they there is the Gentiles who are listening, and the we that he referred to are the Jewish people who had already received the Holy Spirit and been immersed in water.
Right.
And what he's saying is that who can stop these Gentiles from also being baptized? That to me is one of the funniest verses in the Bible, because he's panicking a little bit like, I guess it's okay to baptize Gentiles. Right. Would anybody have an issue today if a bunch of Gentiles came from, North Dakota, and they landed at Ben Gurion Airport, and they got in a bus, and they went to the Jordan River, and they started baptizing these Gentiles? Would anybody care?
No.
But if you took a bus full of Jewish people, and it would be all over the news. What are they doing? It's crazy. It's wrong. But it was the exact opposite back during the days of Peter.
Somehow it's flipped 180 degrees.
Yes, and that's why I call it identity theft. Ooh, very good. You're following me.
I got it.
Okay, what's next?
So the next name, the next person of interest is, I understand there's a pope, and his name is Peter.
There are some people that believe, particularly in Catholicism, and I believe also in the Eastern Orthodox, that Peter was the Bishop of Rome.
Right.
And the Pope, the actual Pope, his actual title is Bishop of Rome. And Peter was the first, and then there's what they call apostolic succession, the idea that it goes from Peter to the next one, the next one, the next one. There's a lot of problems with that. Number one is that the Catholic Church became the primary persecutor of the Jewish people up until really recently.
Right.
I mean, it was murderous at times during the Middle Ages. Let's just go to Spain. In Spain, during the 1400s, what do they say? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Well, that was also when they killed a lot of Jews.
Right.
And they did that because of what's called the Inquisition. Jewish people would be told, you either convert to Catholicism, and it was political. They weren't looking for people to become genuine believers, but they wanted to unite everyone in Spain under one religion, under Catholicism.
Control.
Right, control. And so Jewish people would either convert or they'd be kicked out of the country.
Right.
That's how my wife's family ended up in Morocco and then eventually in Israel. And that's how a lot of Jews ended up in Poland. Those are the two primary places that they went, tens of thousands of them. But this organization that Peter was supposedly the first pope of, they did not like the Jewish people very much. In fact, when a Jewish person, and I have this confession, I won't read it right now, but during the 700s, if a Jewish person came to faith or out of persecution, just, whatever,
Right.
they would have to read a public confession, basically comparing Judaism to witchcraft, saying they'll never return to the vomit of Judaism.
Wow.
I mean, it was very intense. They would have to read this publicly, and then they could never go back. And if they did go back, particularly during the Inquisitions, let's suppose they were caught, I don't know, eating refusing to eat a ham sandwich.
Right.
That was against the law. You could not refuse to eat pork.
Wow.
They had church spies that would spy on these, what they were called new Christians or Marranos, which means pig. That's what they nicknamed the Jewish believers.
Wow.
And they would watch them and spy on them. And if you rested on the Sabbath, you could get arrested. It was just crazy. But what's even crazier is that their first leader was a Jewish guy.
Right.
First of all, they follow a Jewish man in Yeshua, but now you're saying that the first bishop of Rome was a Jewish guy. Do any of them even remember that Peter is Jewish?
Jewish, no.
Well, there's a lot more trouble with that than just that. So Yeshua, we know the story where in Matthew 16, he gives Simon a nickname. Who's Simon? Well, that's Peter. Peter's name was not Peter. His name was Simon, Shimon in Hebrew. And nobody ever called him Peter until this day. And by the way, Yeshua never called him Peter. He called him Kepha. Kepha in Aramaic means rock. Rock translated from, or transliterated to the difference between translated and transliterated. Transliterated means that you just change the sounding of the letters, but you keep it the same. So you take it to Greek and it's Cephas. That's why in some of your Bibles it refers to Peter as Cephas. That is Kepha. The K becomes a C, and they add an S at the end. But rock in Greek is Petros. Petros in English is Peter. It's not actually a name. People name their kids Peter all the time, but it comes from, it's like The Rock, it was a movie star, a wrestler, but it was a nickname that Peter had.
Right.
Now, this whole idea that he was the Bishop of Rome, there is no evidence, archaeological evidence, written evidence, there's no sacred texts that declare that Peter was, he probably went to Rome. But, Paul writes a letter to the Romans. He doesn't say, greet the bishop, Peter. Right. So there's just no evidence that he was the bishop of Rome. Another interesting thing is this. Later on, Catholics would say that the Pope, in issues of doctrine and faith, was infallible.
Right.
So if he says, even if he contradicts the last Pope, he becomes, his ruling is infallible. I'm not quite sure, I'm not an expert on Catholicism, I'm not sure if that means that his edict is correct, or if it simply means that God has given him authority even if he's wrong. Okay. Nevertheless, it's common that they might take the Pope today is quite liberal, right, compared to popes before him. And there were other popes. I mean, if you read, when I took church history for the first time, Evan, it's brutal. You had popes fighting each other, like killing each other. So there was a pope named Stephen VI. He had the body of the pope before him exhumed, dressed in his episcopal robes so he could stand trial. He was found guilty, but the dead guy was found guilty. On cross-examination, his responses were lacking, apparently. But this mock trial also declared all of Pope Formosis's ordinations, that was the guy that was exhumed, to be invalid, and so apparently he was not as infallible as he thought he was. Wow. So,
it's crazy.
The history's kind of rough.
Yeah.
So in 1965, there was Vatican II. This is one of the great things that has happened in recent history in the Catholic Church. And in Vatican II, they put out a paper called Nostra Aetate, which means in our time. And this paper, I would encourage everyone to Google it and read it, but the Catholic Church renounces replacement theology.
Wow.
A lot of people don't know that even though a lot of Catholics may embrace it, the official stance of the Catholic Church is that the gift and calling of God, Romans 11:29, to Israel is irrevocable. Wow. So that happened in 1965, and since then the Catholic Church officially, their doctrine is that they do not believe that the church has replaced Israel. Now, if we're going to talk about Peter being infallible as the Bishop of Rome, we have this story in Galatians chapter 2 where Paul publicly rebukes Peter over not being willing to eat with Gentiles. This is after they'd had the revelation that God had cleansed the Gentiles. And Paul felt it was hypocritical, and he not only rebuked him to his face, but then he wrote about it, and that became part of the Bible. Kind of a rough thing for Peter to live with, but he clearly, I love Peter. He's one of my favorite characters in the New Testament. I'll tell you what I love about Peter is that despite the fact that he makes a lot of mistakes, he gets up on the Mount of Transfiguration and blurts out, let's go to Home Depot and build, tabernacles for you guys. He gets rebuked by God. Then he denies the Lord. Despite all that, on the day of Shavuot, Pentecost, he is the guy who stands up and preaches, and God anoints him, gives him this incredible evangelistic message. 3,000 Jewish people come to faith. And he's an amazing person. But it was James, we're going to talk about him because just a little hint, nobody ever called him James. But it was the brother of Jesus, who, by the way, was not a believer when Jesus died. Jesus' brothers and sisters, you can only imagine growing up with somebody who suddenly at 30 years old starts turning, water into wine and multiplying fish, and people follow him. They didn't believe. But after the resurrection, James did become a believer, and by Acts 15, he is clearly the bishop of Jerusalem, or the head apostle in Jerusalem. Even though he was not one of the 12 apostles, he is the one with the most authority. He's in Jerusalem. They come together for Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council, and he's the one calling the shots. He, says the apostles and the elders, there are Pharisee believers there. Peter and Paul are there, or I should say Shimon and Paul. And Paul, by the way, we're going to learn about him in just a minute. They're there, but it's James, or again, I don't want to get ahead of myself. It's James who is the one with apostolic authority. So it's ridiculous to say that Peter or Shimon, this Jewish fisherman who becomes an evangelist, was the first pope. And by the way, Rome was not the center of Christianity until the 300 years later. It wasn't until the believers were persecuted all over the Roman Empire, off and on. So it was in 312 that Constantine becomes a believer. The Council of Nicaea is in 325, but it was until 380 that Theodosius, who is the emperor now, declares in the Edict of Thessalonica that Christianity is now the primary official religion of the Roman Empire. So this is 350 years after the time of Yeshua, and 320 years or so since Peter or Shimon has been killed. So again, there is no evidence historically that he was ever the bishop of Rome. And that brings us to, and let me just say this. We just mentioned about, James in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the center at that time.
Right.
During the time of the apostles, Jerusalem was the center. Antioch became also a center. But, well, I don't want to get into James too quick. I have some more things to share about that. Well, wait just a minute.
Okay.
What's next?
Next is Saul.
What? Who's Saul? He was a king in the Old Testament.
A friend of Paul.
There's no... Oh, you're talking about Paul the Apostle.
Paul the Apostle.
Okay, so...
Who was he?
When I was a new believer, I remember being taught that Paul was this formerly Jewish guy, rabbi, who persecuted the church, and then he became a believer, and he was so disgusted with Judaism, and he was so disgusted with his Jewish name that he wanted to change it to a Christian name. And so he went from being called Saul, which is, there's a wicked king named Saul, to becoming Paul, which was a Christian name. Now, there are so many problems with that, and we're going to go through them one at a time. First of all, read the verse where we get that from.
Acts 13:9?
Yes.
All right. Then Saul, who was also called Paul, filled with the Holy Spirit.
Okay, just stop right there. Does it say in that verse that he changed his name?
It says Saul, who was also called Paul. No.
Okay, so I could say, then LeBron, who is also called King James, I could say anybody with two. There's a lot of people with two names.
So he had two names.
He had two names. Now the question is, why would he have two names? Why would this guy who's now going around, he's sharing the gospel, he's an apostolic leader, why does he have two names? It's very simple. I'm Jewish. I was born in America. I was given two names. I was given a Hebrew name, which is not Ron, believe it or not. Even though I live here and I go by Ron, that is my English name. Right. I kept it when I moved here because it's a common Hebrew name as well. But my actual Hebrew name is Chaim, which is a great name. It means life. But that is my name, Chaim. Why was I given two names? Well, I was given a Hebrew name because I lived in the diaspora, as did Paul. Right. And you were often given a name that was compatible, like me, one that was compatible in America and one that would be compatible within Judaism or in the land of Israel. Paul was a rabbi. Of course he would have two names. He was also a Roman citizen. So yes, he wouldn't run around the Roman world going by Shaul, which is how you say it, not Saul, but Shaul. When he was in the Roman world, he used the name Paul. When he was in the Hebrew-speaking world, he used his Hebrew name. Right. That is typical. Right. In fact, he's not the only one that we know of. If you go to read Acts 12:12.
Acts 12:12. When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John.
Wait, the house of who?
Mary.
I don't think so.
Maria.
Miriam.
The mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying.
So there's a guy named John who's also called Mark, and yet the whole world calls him John Mark.
John Mark.
They think his name is John Mark. No, he was a Jewish guy who lived in the Roman world at times, who had the Jewish name Yochanan, and then he had the Roman name Marcus. So, in fact, in Hebrew, we call the Gospel of Marcus, which it's not a Hebrew name. It's not a Jewish name. It's a Roman Latin name. He had two names just like Paul. So, if you've ever heard, in fact, one of the most famous pastors, who loves Israel, by the way, I heard him teaching, I won't say his name, but I heard him teaching a few years ago, and I was writing identity thefts, and he talked about, he was teaching on Paul, Saul, and he just, Paul changed his name after he became a believer. No, he did not change his name. His mommy and his daddy gave him two names, just like John Mark's. Mommy and daddy gave him Yochanan John when he was around Jewish people, and Marcus that he would get along in the Roman Empire.
Wow.
By the way, that is common today with Jewish people who if you go back into the 1940s and before, many Jewish people would have an identity within the Jewish or Yiddish community in Europe and a different identity outside in the Gentile world. There is a little bit about Paul. He didn't, and by the way, the idea that he changed his name from wicked, horrible Jewish Saul to, I need some angels to sing, Paul is ridiculous because the idea that he chose Paul because it was a Christian name is ridiculous because there were no Christian names. Do you understand? Paul was the first Paul. In other words, if you want to name, he wasn't the first person named Paulus. He was the first. If people name their kids Paul today, it's after Paul.
Yeah, right.
He didn't think, what Christian name should I think? Paul is a Christian name because of him. Before that, it was just a typical Latin Roman name.
Right.
So no, he would not go into the pagan world and look for a new name. He was born with that name. Okay, I hope you're still with us. We got just one more.
James.
Yes.
Or?
Yaakov.
Jacob.
Right. So if you're listening to this podcast and you're in just about any other country other than America or England or Australia or any English-speaking nation, your Bible probably has the fellow that we refer to as James as some form of Yaakov or Jacob. Because nobody in his entire... James is a great name if you're a butler. If you want to be a butler, James is great. If you want to be a shofar, drive somebody... James. You say it with an English accent, James. But nobody ever called James, the brother of Yeshua, James. Nobody ever called Jacob, the brother of John, or the other James, Jacob, that was one of the disciples. They called them Jacob or Yaakov in Hebrew. And again, we're making a big issue of this because of the identity theft. When you think of James, you think of the butler or the shofar, a very English-sounding name. When you think of Jacob or Yaakov, you're thinking of a Jewish name. Now, you're saying, well, Ron, that is sinister. Why did they do that? I bet I know why, Evan.
Why?
It was probably King James. Is that when they translated the Bible into English, he wanted to get his name in there. And there are a lot of people who believe that, who teach that, but the Bible had actually already been translated into English before the King James Version. It is far more likely, well, let me just tell you this. The Latin name for James is Icamus. The Latin name for Jacob is Ichabus. They sound almost alike. And it was probably just some linguistic word confusion, or maybe demonic, because again, it takes away the Jewishness of the gospel. When you think that the primary leader of the first believers is some guy named James versus a guy named Jacob, and let me just say this about Yaakov, James. He was a significant figure in history. Josephus records that he was one of the most, if not the most respected Jew of his day. All the different sects of Judaism, the Essenes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, they all respected James. He was the only person, and we know this from Josephus. We also know it from Eusebius. Mm-hmm. And he was the only Jewish guy that was allowed into the temple anytime he wanted to. And the reason they let him in is because he would go and pray for the people of Israel. And how he died is quite tragic, is in probably 62, the Pharisees were getting kind of jealous of him because everybody loved him so much. His nickname was Camel Kneed. Why? Because he would spend so much time on his knees in the temple that his knees were calloused like camels.
Wow.
And so they they were getting jealous. They didn't like him. The governor had died, so the law was kind of shady at that time. By the way, when and where we live, governor dies, you replace him. In the Roman Empire, you had to send a letter. A guy had to get it, the letter. He might die on the way. Send another letter. Took time. Took about a year, 2 years to get Rome to send another governor. In the meantime, because the Jewish people did not have the authority for capital punishment, but there was no governor.
Right.
So they invited him to bring a greeting to the people on Passover. He would come to the pinnacle of the temple. Have you ever heard that term? The pinnacle of the temple?
No.
Okay, so in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus is taken by Satan to the pinnacle of the temple. A lot of people just think that's a generic high place on the temple. No, there was a place on the southwestern corner of the Temple Mount. Okay. So if you know the Temple Mount, if you look at in your Google map or worldview, globe view, whatever, there was the temple, but then there was this mount that it was built upon that was four-cornered. Herod did it. It was remarkable. And on the southwestern corner, there was a pinnacle, a very high place, and they would go up there every Saturday or every Friday night, and they would blow the shofar. Everybody would know the Shabbat would begin. Saturday night, when Sabbath was over, they would blow it again. They would also do it for other things. It was their email of the day. It's how they communicated. Satan takes Yeshua up there and he tempts him. Throw yourself down from here, and the angels will protect you. He says, "You shall not tempt the Lord your God." Right. That's where Yaakov, the brother of Yeshua, is standing, in the very place that Satan took Yeshua and tempted him.
Wow.
Once he's up there, the Pharisees say, who is Yeshua? And he quotes from his brother, and he says, "Yeshua, you'll see him coming on the great power in the clouds of heaven." And they said, no. And they tell him to denounce him. They want him to deny Jesus.
Right.
He won't do it, so they throw him down. Now, you've been to Jerusalem. You know how high it is if you're standing below the western wall?
Yeah.
Well, the pinnacle wasn't just on the top of the western wall. It was then another 100 or so feet up.
Right.
And he hits the ground.
Wow.
The stone, he survives. He begins to pray for the people. "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." And the Pharisees stir up the people. People begin to stone him. Somebody says, "Stop, stop. He's praying for you." And then some guy takes what's called a launderer's stick, where you would bat this massive stick that you would hit laundry with. Okay. And hits him on the head, and he dies.
Wait, Ron, I've never heard that story. Where's that from?
I made it up.
Okay, that's good.
No, I did not make it up. So we have two sources for this. One is a guy named Hyssagepus, who I've never actually heard anybody pronounce his name, but I hope that's how you say it. And Hyssagepus I believe he was alive in the 2nd century, and he was a Jewish believing historian. So this is a story that was passed down from generation to generation, over about 100 years or so. You say, well, wait a minute, Ron, that's a long time. Josephus also, they both record different parts of the story. And it was also during this time, which we'll get into in another podcast, that Jerusalem is surrounded by the Romans. And, we know the destruction happened in 70. So in the same story, we learn about the fact that an angel came to the Jewish believers at that time and warned them to get out of Jerusalem, reminded them of the prophecy of Yeshua. When you see the Romans surrounding the city, head to the mountains. Right. So they go over the Jordan River, but it was during this time. So the only discrepancy is Josephus, I believe, has his death in 69, and Hyssagepus has it in 62. 62 is more probable. Because it was before the Roman invasion.
Right.
But
the events, though.
Yeah, but you can. I have a video on this. It's in. I think it's an identity. It might be in the second book, The Jerusalem Secret. Mm-hmm. But it is. If you Google these stories, you can find them, and you can find them in the writings of Eusebius. Who was Eusebius? He was also a Jewish bishop. I believe he was Jewish bishop in the 4th century, who recorded these things. And so if you Google those things, you will find it in his original writings from the 4th century.
Wow, those are amazing truths. It's amazing to really see how through the names already the identity theft, how already we're starting to see how Yeshua is slowly being stolen from his Jewish identity to something else. And as believers, we know obviously that it's amazing that we know Satan is afraid and he knows that Yeshua will return. And we can see through this how he is already trying to control the story and the narrative so that he can make Yeshua not be Jewish, so that the Jews will not come to faith.
Right. Now the neat thing is that since the Holocaust, scholars have begun, as they begin to realize that the Holocaust could not have happened without 2,000 years of Christian anti-Judaism. And you notice I didn't say anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is the idea that there's something genetically wrong with Jewish people.
Right.
The church was not anti-Semitic. They didn't think there was something genetically wrong. They thought you have the wrong religion. You have a religion that God has rejected. And it was 1,900 years of that belief. God has rejected Israel. And he loves the church. That, well, Hitler could never have pulled off the Holocaust without Luther, without Constantine, without, when the Council of Nicaea took place in 325, Constantine made it illegal to celebrate this resurrection with Passover.
Right.
Up until that time, the church used the date of of Passover to celebrate the resurrection. Right. So Hitler was able to do what he did because of 1,900 years of Christian anti-Judaism.
Right.
Since the Holocaust, scholars, when they realized that, they said something's wrong. Something's wrong with our theology, with the way that we study. We need to go back and look at this differently. And so modern scholarship appreciates the Jewish roots of the faith. And the things that we shared today, they know.
Right.
The sad part is most of the, over 1 billion believers on planet Earth don't know it. So we're going to start one podcast at a time.
All right, so that's amazing, the way that this has worked and how this has all happened. And so identity theft.
Yeah.
How can the viewers, if they want to get it?
Well, you can get a free copy.
Yep.
I mean, you can go to my website and get it and pay for it, and get a hard copy. You can go to Amazon.com and order a hard copy, but you can get a free copy just by going to ShelanoTV.com and sign up for our newsletter, and we will send you a free copy.
Wonderful. So we just want to thank you all for joining us today on this podcast. We hope you're enjoying it. And if you are, we suggest that you send comments, that you like us, that you ring the bell, subscribe, and keep in touch with us. And we're going to continue for filming and uploading these shows. And we would love for you to continue to join us and be with us. And more and more, we can just learn about God's plan for the Jewish people in this time. So thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
And until next time. Thank you so much. God bless.